Blood satellite.
I'm just looking at the counter signal. It's on countersignal.com. This was published 2024, February 28th. Headline is Secret Documents Reveal Trudeau Government. Virologists had, quote, clandestine relationship with Chinese agents. Interesting. So it says here, documents authored by Canada's top intelligence service reveal that long-awaited explanation behind the abrupt departure of two virologists from Canada's top biolaboratory. The documents, which have been viewed by the Countersignal and published here for our readers' expose the Trudeau government for hiding the true reason for the departure of Dr. Zhang Guoqi, Canada's public health agency. Despite the Liberals citing the departure as a personal issue, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, accuses Dr. Q of a long history of clandestine actions that put Canadians' health and security at risk.
Looking at documents from CSIS that gave an assessment that while they didn't think there was malicious intent, that perhaps these scientists were just naive about their collaborations and they're not following rules, that they would not willingly cooperate with a foreign power, that kind of thing, they were still a risk. And therefore, the CSIS recommendation, or well, sort of recommendation, was that they should not be given their security clearances anymore, which basically means they can't work as scientists in this top secret lab anymore. But going further into the documents, CSIS did a later assessment based on a second interview, which shows an evolution in their thinking and assessment. And that's because between interview 1 and 2, they clearly had gathered some more information.
Right.
And then when they brought it to these scientists, especially Dr. Q, it was denial, not telling the truth.
Alongside selling deadly pathogens to Chinese authorities at the Wuhan Institute of Virology for just $75. Jesus Christ.
Wow. What?
Like, make it free or make it $20,000.
That's embarrassing.
Like, that's such an unforgivably Chinese amount to sell.
Maybe many just covered him at the buffet and they found the receipt. It was about $75. Maybe that's what they meant.
He went to the Chinese restaurant and said, give me everything. Give me your finest food, and it cost $75. He was also found to have hidden a Chinese bank account from CSIS. He was shown to have given China agents direct access to Canada's National Microbiology Laboratory, a biosafety level 4 facility which houses Canada's most secret and secure pathogenic diseases. These pathogens can be used in weaponry. CSIS also found that Key was actively working with the Chinese Wuhan Virology Lab on a project that CSIS redacted and called Project One. That's not suspicious. The project started January 1st, 2019, just 3 months before she sent a shipment of materials to the Wuhan lab, and the project involved the study of mRNA vaccines. I mean, this is just, it's like it was written for us.
Yeah.
It's like you just hit every key phrase. ChatGPT just coughed up something to get me hard. Project 2 was cited by CSIS as being a cross-species infection program that could have been used for gain-of-function research into bat viruses. I mean.
You can't make it up, man. Jesus.
CSIS reported that at least 5 virus strains from that March 1st pathogen shipment from Winnipeg to Wuhan, I don't know why I find that so amusing, were referenced in the Institute's Project One. All right. So I think that's a good ripped from the headlines sort of thing to set up. And as far as I know, this is ongoing. As far as I know, this news has dropped. No one else is talking about it. As far as I know, like have people in your office, in your life, your family, has anyone talking?
No. This is all. It's almost like people have forgotten about all of the conspiratorial context of COVID. Like people will still like COVID was a wild time, but nobody wants to talk about the details how and why it happened. It's too much of an open wound.
Yeah, but you keep keep seeing things like this, and it's like, I don't want to keep using the phrase vindication, but I think everything we've talked about has come to pass, and it's worse than you thought.
Oh yeah.
I think if people just hear Wuhan, they check out, they tune out. I'm like, no, like I'm willing to forgive you for calling me crazy, but please, this is important. I'm
Yeah.
begging you. I'm not talking about this just because it interests me. I'm talking about this because I think this is relevant to our survival as a civilization. You can't keep acting like you're bored of it. This is important shit, just like what we're going to talk about now. Now, this is a book that I discussed on a show very, very briefly that I appeared on recently that I'm not going to play on this episode, but maybe the next one, actually. But it's a book where the title almost says itself. You just read the title and the subheading, and you almost get everything you need to know. So I'm going to read the whole thing. The title of this book by Edward T. Haslam is titled Dr. Mary's Monkey. Dr. Mary's Monkey, How the Unsolved Murder of a Doctor, a Secret Laboratory in New Orleans, and Cancer-Causing Monkey Viruses are linked to Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassination of John F. Kennedy and emerging global epidemics.
That's insane.
Now, that sounds like it's a very interesting book. There's a lot of people in our sphere who've heard of this book, and a friend of mine who's been on the show before, Christopher Sandbach, he lives in New Orleans, and he goes very, very deep into New Orleans history. He's got a real affection for that city, and so much of this book takes place in New Orleans in the mid-20th century, sort of local lore. But I'm going to set up the book by saying that it's very, very interesting. There's a lot in this book that is just pulled from history, pulled from the news, and almost that alone is enough to stand alone. There's some wild speculation made in the book. Like many, I'll say conspiracy theory books, many conspiracy theory books written by very passionate authors tend to use their own life experience a lot in it, which is fine. But, you know, these books can tend to turn into autobiographies of the author.
Book is called Dr. Mary's Monkey.
Dr. Mary's Monkey, and the Mary involved was Dr. Mary Sherman, who lived on St. Charles Avenue near Louisiana. And in 1964, her body was found stabbed 7 or 8 times, set on fire, and her right arm was missing, which was never told to the press. And there was nothing in her apartment that could do that. And so I got very interested in this because Mary Sherman was a colleague of my father at Tulane Medical School.
Really?
So there were people that connected to my family, and I wanted to know what happened to my father's colleague.
Yeah.
And I got the police reports and the autopsy reports and all the media, and I found out what the media had not been told about it. So the public had not been told that her right arm and rib cage had been disintegrated by heat. So I had a lot of questions, and I got deeper and deeper into this, and before it was all over, we wound up with a biological weapon and Lee Harvey Oswald all going on in uptown New Orleans.
And I'm reminded of Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper, where a lot of that book is him explaining his life and his relationship, which is fine, but it's very, very anecdotal. And there's entire chapters of this book that draw some very, very loose connections, and the entire end of it is, am I saying these two things are connected? No, but could they be? Like when it ends with a very speculative question, I'm like, okay, that I just wasted 20 pages. But there is stuff in here that's very, very relevant. So I'm just going to, I got a lot of notes here. We might not spend too long on it, but I think there's enough here that will interest people. So he starts by saying that in the late 1960s, I heard about Mary Sherman's connection to an underground medical laboratory run by a suspect in the murder of President Kennedy. I was told they were using monkey viruses to create cancer. The possibility of this being used as a biological weapon were clear. What began as an investigation into this single murder morphed into consideration of epidemics which killed millions of people and which cost billions of dollars. It became an investigation into an underground medical laboratory that was accidentally discovered during the investigation into the JFK assassination, a laboratory which secretly irradiated cancer-causing monkey viruses to develop a biological weapon. Now, when people read that, maybe even they read this at the time, because when did this book come out? This would have come out, I believe, in 2007. It was based after he wrote this book, I think, in like the 80s, but then he kind of redid it, re-released it, and reprinted it later. So this came out in 2007, I believe. But there was a time when people said, "Oh, like creating viruses, creating cancers in a lab. Why would people do that?" But I hope people with 2024 vision understand that that's almost all they do in these labs. That's what they were doing in Canada. And the problem wasn't whether or not they were doing it, it's just how much of it leaked out when they were secretly trafficking it out through double agents, right? So like it should go without saying that the cancerous monkey part is the most realistic part of this, even though it sounds the most preposterous to some people. So he's got a lot of interesting stuff in here where he says, as I pored over the official cancer statistics from the National Cancer Institute, I saw the dimensions of the massive epidemic of soft tissue cancers that had swept our country, an epidemic that had been all but ignored by our watchdog press.
According to a review of cancer registries across 44 countries, early onset cases are rising for 14 types of cancers, many of which affect the digestive system.
The typical risk factors we think of that would cause these different tumor types are definitely different, specific to each one.
I also noticed that the names connected to the polio vaccine were names connected to Dr. Mary Sherman and to the investigation of the JFK assassination. I began to suspect that these secrets were somehow intertwined, secrets which presented serious accountability problems for the people in power. So a lot of this book is this person knew that person. There's a relationship that's at the center of this book, and that's a relationship between Dr. Mary Sherman, who we'll get into, who's brutally murdered, and this guy named David Ferrie, I believe. What was his name? His last name was Ferrie, who was a real character we'll get to in a second. But those two did know each other. And that's what made Mary Sherman kind of suspicious. But these two individuals shouldn't have known each other, and they're connected through this kind of weird secret lab. So that part also seems to be true. There's some other tenuous connections, but once you look at what the most solid evidence is for, is actually pretty interesting. So he's kind of starting off with the cancer thing here. He says, during the early 1960s, there were numerous outbreaks of infectious diseases among the animal handlers in monkeys around the country. Waterborne diseases were transferred through saliva, moisture in the breath, and urine. They could be caught just by being around primates. Primates are intelligent mammals, and they quickly figured out that a trip to the handler meant being stuck with needles. So what he was saying was that the monkeys also learned how to defend themselves. Monkeys were very popular for cultivating viruses because there's just something about monkeys and their DNA and their genetics that make them great hosts for diseases. That's why they were used, but they're also the most dangerous. It says one book published in the 1960s made the point clear in the title, The Hazards of Handling Simians, and listed the numerous outbreaks of diseases in primate research facilities during the previous 2 decades. So they loved using primates, but primates were like a big problem for leaking diseases. He also says experimentation with carcinogenic viruses was widespread during throughout the network of primate research centers from the U.S. to Europe to USSR. In the 60s, blood, tumor cells, and viral extracts were routinely taken from a variety of animals and injected into monkeys in a game of viral roulette. One lab created tumors in as little as 8 days. Another lab injected human volunteers with a known cancer-causing monkey viruses to observe the effects. New diseases started to appear, diseases which were unknown in the wild. One such disease that first appeared in the lab is called SAIDS, or Simian AIDS. It occurred when African monkey viruses were given to Asian monkeys. You know, he makes an argument in the book that this could very well be where HIV and AIDS came from, because it's widely accepted that HIV and AIDS made the jump from the primate population to the human population.
Right.
There's a lot of different explanations for why some people think that, a guy fucked a monkey, and that's how they got it. Some people think it might have come through Africans eating bushmeat, because it's not uncommon in a lot of African countries where they just like eat raw monkey a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And there could be just contaminated blood that gets into a mouth sore. They can jump that way. There's a lot of reasons. One explanation is that it was just cultivated in a lab because they wanted to experiment with diseases. It says in 1959, the U.S. Congress finally took the danger of an accidental monkey virus epidemic seriously and financed 7 regional primate centers in the U.S. to get the experiments out of the cities. Tulane University in New Orleans is where we're focusing on here.
The monkeys that live on this huge plot of land near a small Louisiana town are pivotal in the fight against COVID-19. Many of the 5,000 primates at the Tulane National Research Center are destined for use in scientific research for the virus. The facility has high-level biosafety labs and is able to handle biological threats as dangerous as anthrax, making it well positioned to pivot quickly to COVID research when the pandemic hit.
And he says it kind of fell out of fashion because in the 1940s, John F. Enders, a microbiologist from Harvard, figured out how to grow viruses in test tubes of human cells. At the time, the breakthrough was hailed as the end of the monkey era. We don't need to use monkeys anymore. He says, today, however, there are approximately 20,000 monkeys sitting in cages in scientific labs across the country. I have no reason to doubt that number. So there's still monkeys being used, and people kind of know that there's still, simian tests being done. But because I think they just are that effective, especially for creating these sorts of diseases. It mentions the Kennedy assassination. That also sits at the heart of this. There's a district attorney named Jim Garrison who was investigating the assassination of President Kennedy at the time. He was sort of this hero of the case. The amount of press coverage that's received in New Orleans was staggering. He appeared on national television and stated in an unambiguous language that a faction within the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency had murdered the President of the United States. So that's where a lot of these conspiracy theories come from. And in 1967, this man Garrison, he arrested a New Orleans businessman named Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw, he was arrested for conspiring to assassinate the president. And he said at that time, Garrison blamed the extremist elements within the anti-Castro community. And to prevent any misinterpretation, he specifically pointed out that his team not only had not found any evidence of involvement by the CIA itself. But in 1967, all that changed. Garrison upped the stakes by announcing on national TV that Kennedy's death was a coup d'etat organized by elements inside the CIA, particularly its plans division. The heart of the case was that he had associated this man, Clay Shaw, this businessman, with Lee Harvey Oswald during the summer of 1963. And he thought that was Shaw setting up Oswald for the fall guy. And now we introduce a third character named Ferrie, Ferrie. Here's how he connects to all of that assassination stuff. Now, Ferrie, I'm just going to read what it says about this guy. Ferrie was an unusual man in many respects. Get ready because a new literally me is about to drop. Professionally, he was a pilot. Politically, he was a notorious right-wing extremist. Personally, he was completely bald from head to toe. And this is where the literally me kind of hit the brakes. He was also a homosexual who favored teenage boys.
Fuck.
And every time I hear a homosexual who favors teenage boys, I assume they're a pedophile and teenage is just what they say. Anyway, Ferrie died several days after Garrison's investigation was being public. Garrison, who was about to arrest Ferrie for conspiring to assassinate the president, thought that either Ferrie had been murdered to silence him or Ferrie had silenced himself. Ferrie had also known Lee Harvey Oswald when he was a cadet at the Civil Air Patrol and had seen him that summer. Ferrie's role in the assassination was as a getaway pilot. He reportedly spent 2 weeks before the assassination at mafia boss Carlo Marcello's hunting camp across the Mississippi River. Ferrie lived alone, but in his closets, they had found both women's clothing and priest robes. Because this guy also desperately wanted to be a priest. He was a Catholic and wanted to be a priest, and he mentions in the book how the Catholic Church kicked him out because they said you're a gay insane man, so you can't be a priest. but he tried to join a bunch of different churches in his life, and they kept getting like lower and lower status. But he just couldn't become a priest. They wouldn't let him, and so he just became an assassin, I guess.
Nice.
In his apartment, they also found a small medical laboratory with 12 mice in cages, which he used for medical experiments. And this guy's all over the map. This guy sounds like a real jerk.
Damn, son, where'd you find
David Ferrie has become a character of almost comic book proportions, a brilliant man rejected by society. He was a collection of contradictions, a man of high moral aspirations who was compromised by personal cravings, a respected airline pilot who became a tattered bohemian rebel, the son of a police captain who helped defend a mafia boss against prosecution. From the orange wig haphazardly glued to his head to his grease paint eyebrows.
What the fuck? Wait. Wait, no, because he's completely bald. He's like alopecia or something.
Yeah.
Right?
So
he has grease paint eyebrows. That's great.
And a fucking red wig. I guess he just like stapled to his head, to his wardrobe full of religious vestments, to his home-brewed cancer experiments, to his burning desire to help teenage boys, to his ability to land planes in jungle clearings at night, to his violent schemes against Castro, to his friendship with Lee Harvey Oswald, to his unrewarded genius. He was the most colorful figure dredged up during the JFK assassinations. I mean, if there's not a movie on this guy, right?
I want to imagine that he wasn't gay. They're just saying that to make him look worse. Because if it wasn't for him being gay, he sounds like a fucking hilarious guy.
Yeah. Maybe he did just want to help the boys. I don't know. Ferrie began his study of biochemistry and took correspondence course in psychology and hypnotism. Albeit from an unaccredited medical school in Italy. I mean, this guy rules. Aside from the gay thing, he's taking weird Italian courses in hypnotism. He listed himself as a doctor in the phone book. He continued his involvement in the Civil Air Patrol and reached the rank of captain. Then he met a cadet named Lee Harvey Oswald. Towards the end of the 60s, another personal tragedy entangled Ferrie. His hair started falling out in clumps. Someone in the government must have seen value in an airline pilot who wanted to train killers, because Ferrie started moonlighting as a pilot for the CIA because he really hated Castro. He really hated communism. He just wanted to kill every communist he could get his hands on. The precise extent of Ferrie's relationship with the CIA is not known. Many of the documents are still classified, but it's widely reported that he flew numerous missions in and out of Cuba, first supplying Castro with arms to fight Batista, and then later supplying anti-Castro movements with underground weapons. Back in New Orleans, Ferrie's involvement with the increasingly desperate anti-Castro Cuban underground was escalating. His main employment was working as a private investigator for a white ring extremist named Guy Bannister, who was heavily involved in covert anti-communist activities in Latin America, which is a cool thing to do back then. Like, if guys in our circles could just get mind together and fund guerrillas in South America. I mean, I guess we still could. It's just like, what revolution would we want to support? I don't see nothing out there. He says his assistance to the anti-Castro Cuban underground included military training of 12 Cuban exiles at a rural camp located about 40 miles outside of New Orleans. Their target was Castro himself. He says here, the author says, at this point, let me state that I cannot say if David Ferrie was involved in the assassination directly. The fact that Ferrie was suspected of being involved in the Kennedy assassination is why we know about him in the first place. So the only reason we know all this shit about him is because he was investigated for his involvement. And it's how we know of his involvement in covert medical experiments with Dr. Mary Sherman and others. Now, you mentioned Mary Sherman. Who the fuck is Mary Sherman? So Mary Sherman was this doctor, considered absolutely brilliant by her medical colleagues. She rose rapidly to the very top ranks of American medicine in bone and joint surgery, a field that to this day has very few female physicians. Self-made, financially successful, and professionally respected, Dr. Sherman was a sophisticated and powerful woman. None of this seems to explain or even hint at her involvement with a politically violent, emotionally unstable, drug-addicted social outcast like David Ferrie, who had no formal medical training. It's like, why are these two people connected? Because they were. Now, what happened to Mary Sherman that is so suspicious? Well, at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning one night, a neighbor smelled smoke and called the police. His name was Juan Valdez, which sounds familiar to me. Like I keep thinking there's another murder case where there's
Probably
a Juan
plenty.
Valdez. I would imagine that at this time there's a lot of Juan Valdez's involved in things, you know. When the firefighters arrived, they removed a smoking mattress from the apartment. Within minutes, the police searched the apartment and found the badly burned body of a woman that had been stabbed repeatedly. This was Mary Sherman. She was killed. The explanations of Mary Sherman's murder don't add up. The press coverage focused on an intruder angle, yet there was no forced entry. The police investigation failed to determine any identifiable motive. And yet the homicide report strained to imply a sexual motive. The crime scene was also bizarre. How could anyone inflict such massive destruction on another person in the still of the night in a flimsy apartment complex with other people and not have anyone hear anything? Good point. Was she as they stated in the press, a childless, sadomasochistic lesbian witch who tried to become a goddess by developing her own life form, or was she a deep, sensitive, honest, caring physician? There's a lot of strange stories about her. Now, we go back to that Jim Garrison guy. As a lot of this stuff is coming out, we're trying to figure out who killed Mary Sherman, who caused this murder, which leads directly to David Ferrie, who was also in New Orleans at the time with this weird fucking lab in an apartment that he owns, experimenting independently on creating cancer, which Mary Sherman is also interested in. So the story here is that they were kind of working on something related to cancer at the same time. Okay, but what could that be? So Jim Garrison referred to a medical treatise written by David Ferrie on the subject of inducing cancer virally. So this David Ferrie guy, he's got some document that he's prepared that they found at his apartment, purportedly explaining what he was developing, which was inducing cancer through a virus, which you can do through carcinogens. Again, like I said, last episode, a lot of people think cancer is just a genetic thing that happens organically, but you can cause cancer in a lot of ways. Finding the document was a high priority to me, since it would go a long way towards verifying Garrison's claim about Ferrie's cancer research and his capability to induce cancer. The other side of the issue, what did the American medical establishment really know about cancer at the time? And how did the theories and techniques in David Ferrie's medical treatise relate to the leading edge of cancer research in America? And they actually did find the document, and they found he kind of describes in the book about it was a collection of other cancer research about what we knew about how to induce cancers from other medical literature, because a lot of this stuff is just out there. It should be emphasized that the author obviously believed, Dave Ferrie, that cancer was viral. Extracts were made from the malignant tumors which appeared in the test group. These extracts were then injected into other animals of the test group. A variety of malignancies appeared. Leukemia, choriopliothymia, which is cancer of the uterus. Among them, the author revealed his or her experience with a number of experimental anti-cancer drugs. And these were mariposaparin, amnioparin, Ativan, magnesium treconate. David Ferrie would not have access to the unreleased antibiotic developed by a top medical researcher. So basically what he was implying was Mary Sherman, as a medical professional, is helping supply David Ferrie with a lot of the medical literature through which he could conduct his research into how to create cancer virally. Okay, so now, why would they be doing that? Now, this is where it gets a bit more speculative, but it actually gets more interesting. And by the end of this, we do reach a conclusion on how Mary Sherman perhaps died, because it all fits together perfectly, like a good mystery. So here's where this kind of connects with our previous episode on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Vax Unvax. So here we go. At its crest in the early 1950s, over 33,000 Americans fell crippled or died slow, terrible deaths from polio. Most were children. The word polio struck fear in people's hearts. Sarah Stewart's name remains virtually unknown today, but despite her huge contribution to modern medicine. Not only did she prove that some cancers were caused by viruses, but subsequent research on the virus she discovered led to the discovery of DNA recombination, which is one of the most powerful tools in medical research today. So here's an interesting part. There's this woman named Bernice Eddy who helped with a lot of this research. It says, in June 1959, Bernice Eddy, who was still officially assigned to the flu vaccine project, began thinking about the polio vaccine. In October 1960, 1 month before the Kennedy-Nixon presidential debate, Eddy gave a talk to the New York Cancer Society and, without warning, the NIH in advance announced that she had examined monkey kidney cells in which the polio virus was grown and found that they were infected with cancer-causing viruses. Her implication was clear. There were cancer-causing monkey viruses in the polio vaccine. This was tantamount to forecasting the epidemic of cancer in America. So, there's a lot in the book that I kind of skip past there, but this all connects directly to the polio vaccine and how they generated the vaccine itself relatively quickly through their experiments with monkey viruses. And this is sort of what RFK Jr. is saying, that some of the components of these viruses these vaccines they say are safe, but they're really not. And as we've seen, there have been many vaccines that were taken off the market because they did cause these effects. So just to give the headline here, they're claiming that the cancer epidemic that we're seeing in America since the 60s, which is remarkable, which has been remarked upon by the cancer societies of the world, like what's causing this? Oh, maybe it has to do with diet. They're saying it might actually be the polio vaccine, which isn't to say that 100% of the people that get the polio vaccine get cancer, but it would explain an unexplained uptick.
Yeah. It's also an interesting one with polio because it's a vaccine that technically may save some young, healthy people, but the trade-off is everybody over retirement age, it just kills them dead. And it's like, okay, so that's a win-win. From the government standpoint, that's actually it's two birds with one stone. So.
And then it all just goes away. The next part here is that on the heels of the polio fiasco, the medical hierarchy feared the judgment of the masses. Their ability to destroy a painstakingly constructed scientific career overnight had been clearly proved. Another spate of bad news might shatter the public's confidence in vaccines altogether. Where would the world be then, of course? Where would the health establishment be then, he asks. He said, I dug out the cancer statistics published by the National Cancer Institute in 1989, started reading the related literature. Two things became clear. One, we were losing the war on cancer. And two, we were in the midst of an ongoing cancer epidemic. Despite improvements in cancer treatment, which had decreased the age-adjusted per capita death rate, the hard fact remained. Americans were getting cancer faster than ever. Reporting in a 1994 article published by the Journal of American Medical Association, the front page of USA Today stated baby boomers are much more likely to get cancer than their grandparents were at the same age. Interesting. So he asked the question, did dozens of monkey viruses get into the human blood supply from the polio vaccine? Did they contaminate both the Salt and Sabin vaccines? Salt and Sabin, the names of two of the vaccines. Were these the same vaccines given to millions of children in both the United States and Europe? Consider the 1997 quote from the U.S. government's own Journal of the National Cancer Institute. It says, quote, in the 1950s, SV40 was one of several dozen vaccines contaminated. When several dozen viruses that contaminated the original Salk and Sabin polio vaccines administered to millions of school children. The vaccine contaminated was injected into trusting children until 1963. Developing a vaccine against a spectrum of cancer-causing monkey viruses already inoculated into millions of people in the polio vaccine was at best a long shot, but there was some evidence that anti-cancer vaccines were possible. The odds of success were slim, but the stakes were enormous. Millions of Americans with cancer. They had to do something. They had to try, and maybe they'll get lucky. That might have serendipity. In a word, they were desperate. Ferrie and the Agrarian Cuban exiles may have been willing to develop a biological weapon to kill Castro, but I personally had not thought that Dr. Mary Sherman would not only have been party to secret development of biological weapon. I did, however, think that she might have been willing to be part of a covert effort to prevent an epidemic of cancer. Right? So why would she know David Ferrie? Probably wasn't to kill Cubans, but maybe it was to deal with this guy who the CIA had in their pocket. Like, okay, this guy is known for doing some weird cancer stuff. Maybe there's something we can get going in the shadows here. So really the story now is like a race against time to try and cure monkey cancer that millions of Americans already have. and try and like do before anyone fucking notices. And he asked the question to kind of summarize just what were the connections between Mary Sherman and the key viral researchers at the NIH? And are these connections strong enough to explain how an internal treatise on viral cancer research might have found its way into David Ferrie's apartment? And were they strong enough to support the idea that Mary Sherman may have been asked by people at the National Cancer Institute to be part of a covert effort to develop a vaccine to prevent a cancer epidemic? Interesting questions. Now, it gets back to the murder, and this is what we could end on. But, you know, up until now, some of it's speculation, some of it's what if. The parts you should really understand that are proven is that there was research using monkeys in major urban areas about whether or not cancer can be weaponized by a virus. And it would stand to reason that if you could cause cancer with the virus, could you inoculate against cancer with the virus? And also, if you ask any of these virologists now, are you guys working on a cure for cancer? They'll probably say yes. Would they love to have a vaccine that prevents cancer or types of cancer? Of course they would. So it's not even like a staggering, you know, beyond belief thing to guess that this is something they would be working on. Anyway.
Yeah, of course.
Basically, I'm going to end by quickly summarizing that he thinks that her murder is suspicious. One of her arms, I think her left arm, was completely disintegrated. And they're saying, well, even if someone was stabbed and lit on fire, that wouldn't disintegrate the entire arm. Also, they would need to be burning for a long, long time. The theory is that she was killed outside of her apartment, brought into her apartment. It was staged as a murder. Some random crime of passion or through an intruder. And then the police kind of gave up on that because also it is New Orleans. This shit has been known to happen there. He says here, and I just wanted to highlight this part because it's so, I don't know what to make of it. He's like, it was a cold winter night in January 1996. The voice was warm and familiar. It was a medical doctor who had quietly fed me information over the past several years. I will call him Dr. X. For reasons that will become obvious shortly. With Oswald in the picture, the fact that Mary Sherman's murder happened underneath the noses of the Warren Commission investigators takes on a whole new light. Had someone sabotage? So what had happened was, the theory is, I'll just explain it right now. The theory was that to develop these vaccines, they needed a linear particle accelerator, which sounds like science fiction, but it's not. It's just a piece of machinery you use in labs all the time. And the belief is that Mary Sherman accidentally got killed with the linear particle accelerator, because accidents do happen with this. The amount of electricity and heat that's generated by this, people have died,
and radiation,
or just getting struck by what is essentially lightning. I think one of the inventors of the technology is almost like Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen. He was in the chamber and just got vaporized.
I think it was one guy Borkin or whoever in the USSR when they were developing that, and they accidentally turned it on when it was pointed at the back of his head, and it he lost his hearing and it fucked with his brain, but he actually survived. Like, it's bad, but it's not gonna, I don't know. It is bad though.
And so when he bent down to check the instruments, as he had done many times before, Bugorsky was instantly blinded when his head intercepted a particle beam humming with many trillions of protons moving at nearly 300 million meters per second. The subatomic particles, each carrying 70 billion electron volts of energy, effortlessly passed through Bugorsky's brain, skin, and skull. According to a later report, he felt no pain. Incredibly, the physicist wasn't instantly killed, as you may expect, but after he saw 1,000 suns, Bugorsky knew he was in serious trouble. Anatoly calmly finished his work in the chamber, logged the visit in a journal, as usual, and then, without saying a word to anyone about the accident, went home.
They were in a lab. They had a linear particle accelerator, which he tracked down they would have had at the time. There was one lab in New Orleans. She accidentally got her arm vaporized, and then they kind of staged it as a murder. Again, we're getting into a bit of a, speculative. That's a bit of a stretch, but again, I haven't looked at the death report for Mary Sherman. I don't know if her entire arm was in fact gone. It might have just been badly burned. I don't know. He could have misread it. Maybe he's going to get too grandiose and bombastic with the facts here. However, what he thinks happened was she was killed in like a secret lab trying to develop a vaccine for all the secret cancer that everyone has, and they had to cover it up as just a random murder. So that's what they think the murder of Mary Sherman was, and how it connects to David Ferrie, and how it connects, in that sense, to the JFK assassination and all these like weirdos. Not weirdos. You're not a weirdo if you hate communists, but these people were weirdos because they're the types who are going to fly down to Cuba and just like take it over too. He says the Ferrie Sherman Underground Medical Laboratory may have started with the noble patriotic mission of preventing an epidemic of cancer in America. But once the work started, once the power to move cancer from animal to animal was established, once the ability to change viruses genetically was demonstrated, once the more virulent viral strains were isolated, and once Mary Sherman died, and once Guy Bannister died, then the laboratory, the animals, and the viruses were left in the hands of David Ferrie. He could have easily perverted the lab's resources into a biological weapon if he had wished to do so, picking the most virulent strains and delivering them to a target deep in the Caribbean. So it kind of ends with this theory that David Ferrie, kind of being the last man standing, took all this shit and like waged a fucking chemical war in the Caribbean. And
created AIDS in Cuba. Personally,
basically,
with grease paint eyebrows,
in his like sideways wig. It says, what is known about AIDS in the Caribbean is that HIV-1 cases were reported very early in Haiti. In one particular case, a French engineer received a blood transfusion. This is pretty conclusive. It's that HIV-1 existed in the Haitian blood supply around the mid-1970s. AIDS was not reported in the U.S. until 1981. Further, let's see here. Yeah, that's basically it. They said that maybe AIDS was created here and then deployed in Haiti into the Caribbean because of David Ferrie's private war on, I guess, the Caribbean. I guess just because communism was there. So and I tell you what, that is the story I choose to believe.
Go with it. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Because it still gives us all the story that AIDS was created by a gay man.
Yeah.
It was created by a gay man for evil purposes. And deployed for evil purposes. Anyway, that's the end of that. I know that was a bit longer than I wanted to, but the book, once again, is Dr. Mary's Monkey. If you're into conspiracy theories, if you're into New Orleans history, this is a good one to read.
It's a good book for New Orleans history buffs. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to learn about Tulane University, if you want to learn about like the layouts of where these apartments were and their proximity to the French Quarter, I mean, you're going to love this.
There you go.
And how one apartment in New Orleans might have led to worldwide cancer and AIDS. I mean, you got to give it a shot.
You can't beat that, really.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.